Hey readers, it's me, Mrs. Wingers, and I'm back. I got Omar. I have my reader's notebook. I have my sticky notes, which has a big long to-do list on the front. I have blank ones now, and a pen, and I am ready to read. So of course, my first step is to just take a look at the narrative reading progression and pick a skill that I want to focus on. I already have one in mind. Today, I am going to be focusing on analytic reading, questioning the text. This is the last skill in the narrative reading progression. And it means I notice when a character's experiences don't match my own, and I think about how they're different. I notice when something happens in a text that is not fair, and I think about why that is not fair and what could have happened instead. So I think this really fits with this book. One, we're seeing a big conflict in Omar with like Daniel's being really mean and talking about, things with his religion. And I really don't have a lot of personal experience of people teasing me because of my religion. So I think like this first part, the character's experiences really don't match my own. So I'm going to think about how they're different from my own life. So some things I might start my sentences with is the character in the book is different from me in these ways. And I can list them. In the story, blank was unfair. I think a more way to do that would have been, or that's unfair because. Okay, so I'm going to take a note and write down my skills and start reading. Chapter 12. One evening the following week, when we were putting our lasagna-covered dishes into the dishwasher, we heard an ambulance siren coming down the street. Miriam and I both raced to the window while Issa whined to be let down from the table. He was still eating, as usual, because he's super slow. The ambulance lights were flashing so brightly that the whole room was lit up. Miriam and I pressed our faces to the glass. The ambulance had stopped next door, and the paramedics were hurrying toward the front door. "It's Mrs. Rogers," I said in surprise. "Oh, no," gasped Mom. Dad had his quick thinking face on. "I should go," said Mom. "Should I go?" "I should go." Miriam said, "No way, she's horrible." Issa dropped his plate of freezing cold lasagna on the floor with a crash. Dad looked at it and breathed a sigh and ran his hand through his hair. He does that when he has his thinking face on. "What if she doesn't want me? What if she sends me away and shouts at me in front of them?" Mom said as she ran around the room, putting on her scarf on her head and putting her coat on inside out. "It doesn't matter, darling. You go. At least you know you will have done the right thing. Go and see if she needs anything at all." "She doesn't deserve it," said Miriam, and she folded her arms and threw herself onto the sofa. I went to the front door and watched as Mom hurried out of our gate. She reached the ambulance just as they were wheeling Mrs. Rogers out on a stretcher. She was clutching her wrist and telling the paramedics how she had slipped in the bathroom. "I'm here with you," Mom said softly. "I mean, if you want." And then Mom put her hand out so Mrs. Rogers could hold it if she wanted. Mrs. Rogers looked really pale and scared. She said in a small voice, "John isn't here." And then she took Mom's hand and tried to smile. Later, Mom said that when Mrs. Rogers did that, it's easy to forget about all the rotten things she had said. When Mom and Mrs. Rogers came home in a taxi a few hours later, Dad went over too, to help Mrs. Rogers get settled. When they came back, he was grinning from ear to ear because he had heard Mrs. Rogers on the phone as they were leaving, saying, "My lovely neighbors helped me, John. They're such good people, you know." Okay, so that's the end of chapter 12, and I'm having some thoughts. I was thinking as I was reading about how, what kind of questions are bubbling in my mind, and am I noticing if there's anything unfair? But I'm noticing actually character change. And I think the skill of character change is going to make more sense. Even though I didn't write it down as one of the skills that I'm going to work on, I think it's okay to be flexible if you're reading and you notice, ooh, this is character change. Mrs. Rogers has changed her opinions of Omar's family. And so I think it's okay to be flexible in your skills. You don't have to just say, ooh, I can't write about that because I'm not focusing on character change. Don't do that. If you notice a skill and it seems like it makes sense, then jot that down. So that's what I'm going to do now. I've just added chapter 12. I noticed character change, so I made that in all caps. I said, Mrs. Rogers changed her opinion about Omar's family. She talks differently about them now. She doesn't say the Muslims. She says, my lovely neighbors. Chapter 13. All we seemed to talk about in our house for the next little while was how Mrs. Rogers was doing. Does Mrs. Rogers need anything from the supermarket? Should Omar pop over and check if Mrs. Rogers' TV is working properly? Should Issa pick some flowers from the garden to cheer Mrs. Rogers up? Now that Mrs. Rogers knew we were nice, she was a totally different person. She wasn't creepy and mean anymore. She was super happy whenever we went over to her house. That made me wonder why she didn't like us in the first place. Could it have been the fall made her brain work differently? When I suggested this to Dad, he laughed and said that although that was possible, he thought it had more to do with what she had been reading before in the tabloid newspapers about Muslims, where now she knew what we were really like. He said we should invite her to our house during Ramadan so she could learn more about the real Islam. Adults get super excited about Ramadan, which is kind of confusing because during Ramadan, you can't eat or drink all day. I know my mom and dad like to eat a whole lot, and my mom is completely addicted to coffee. Even though they make up for all that not eating when they break their fast at iftar, no one had really ever explained to me what was so good about Ramadan. So I asked Auntie Iman. Auntie Iman was my new Quran teacher. She isn't related to us, but Miriam and I call all the ladies our mom's age auntie because it's rude to just say their name. She comes over to teach me how to read the Quran every Wednesday and Friday after school. I like her because she's kind. She's way better than my last teacher before we moved, who didn't tell me what the words meant and just told me to be quiet whenever I asked a question about Allah, which made it boring. I like to know what words mean. I heard my mom telling my dad that the teacher wasn't doing a good job handling my inquisitive nature. Anyway, it was super handy that Auntie Iman filled me in on what's so good about Ramadan, because Charlie has quite an inquisitive nature too, and he started asking me lots of questions about it. So wait, Omar, in Ramadan, you can't eat for a whole month? Won't people die if they do that? He asked. No, you only have to stop eating from dawn until sunset, basically when the sun is out. All other times you can eat what you want, and you can eat lots, like my mom and dad do, so you stay alive. Okay. Charlie looked a bit relieved, but a bit sheepish too. So I felt a little bad for laughing. But why do people do it? The fasting, I mean. If they like doing it, why do they only do it in Ramadan? Because that's when you're supposed to do it. And for a whole month, you get extra reward points from Allah. I found out that you get 70 times more points for praying and reading the Quran than you do in other months. We were sitting by the sandbox in the playground, so I made 2 piles with the sand. One that was like a massive mountain, and another little tiny one. Okay, that's really cool, said Charlie. Is it hard? I think so. Anyway, even if it's hard, we have the Eid feast to look forward to at the end of the month. It also helps that the devil is locked up during Ramadan, so he can't persuade us to eat when our tummies are rumbling. I imagined a nasty creature grumpily counting down the days to Ramadan because he knew he was going to get locked away. And since it's the devil who whispers to us to do bad things, I was pretty relieved that I could have a whole month without him telling me to eat Miriam's stash of hidden chocolate when she wasn't looking. I was planning to ask Allah for a lifetime supply of chocolate of my own on the night of power, which is in the last 10 days of Ramadan. It's called that because it's better than 1,000 months. That means you could get the same reward points in one night that it would take you 1,000 months to get. That's 83 years. Mind-blowing. Wow. And the angels come down to earth and you can ask Allah for anything you want. Then I remember the best part. And for the people who fast, Allah will give them a secret reward and we don't know what it is. Wow, said Charlie. Maybe like a Ferrari or something. Oh my gosh, Charlie, that would be so awesome. I can almost feel the steering wheel in my hands. Okay, so that's the end of chapter 13. And now I'm having some thoughts like questioning the text and just noticing how Omar's life growing up is so different than mine, right? I didn't fast. I mean, I wasn't Muslim. So I had a very different experience. So I'm just gonna write down some thoughts about how my experience when I was in elementary school was different than Omar's. All right, so I just took a quick note about for chapter 13, my experience in elementary school is very different from Omar's. I'm thankful for books like this that give me a glimpse into other people's lives. And so I'm thinking, like, even though Omar is a made-up person, this is realistic fiction, right? And there are lots of people in the world that have the same experiences as him, even though he is made up. So it's telling me how people different than me live. Chapter 14. The first fast was on Monday. Miriam was going to wake up for the midnight feast because she was going to be fasting for the whole month of Ramadan for the first time. The meal is called suhoor, and it has to happen before dawn. My mom said that I wasn't allowed to get up for it because I was still too young. I wasn't happy about this at all. I wanted my Ferrari. So I put up a fuss and turned on the turbo on my pester power. In the end, Mom said I could practice keeping a fast on the weekend. I said fine, but I was still worried about Miriam getting more reward points than me. So I went to school with breakfast in my tummy as usual. It was funny that at school it was just a normal day, when at home it was special because it was the first day of Ramadan, and that's all anyone could talk about. Nobody in my class was talking about it, which was why I was super surprised when Mrs. Hutchinson bounced over to my table and said, "Happy Ramadan, Omar." I think my cheeks might have gone red, but I looked at her happy Ramadan curls, and I managed a very small thank you. "Are you fasting?" she continued, crouching down near my chair. "No, I'm not allowed," I said. "Oh, well," she said, "I'm happy to go easy on you for PE if you ever do." And she winked and went to write the date on the board. The first person I saw when I looked up was Daniel. Something was making him red and fidgety and really angry. Could it have been jealousy? At break time, Daniel came over to where Charlie and I were sitting doing cool graffiti drawing with chalks on the floor. "You're a teacher's pet." He spat out the words as if they were a really nasty part of a pet, like it's poop. And he pointed the finger at me. And he pointed his finger at me, back and forth, before smudging up our drawings with his foot. Anger bubbled in my chest. I imagined H2O swooping down from the clouds and whacking Daniel with his strong tail. If only he could do that for real. I was so tired of Daniel using any old excuse to pick on me. "Go away, Daniel," I said. "What will you do? Call your girlfriend, Mrs. Hutchinson?" "She's not his girlfriend." "Okay," said Charlie. For a second, I thought Daniel was going to try his headbutting thing again. But luckily, he saw one of the teacher assistants coming toward us, so he ran away. The teaching assistant walked past us slowly, asking if everything was all right. I said yes, even though it wasn't. Afterward, Charlie asked me if we should go and tell her or Mrs. Hutchinson that Daniel was being a big fat bully. I just shook my head. I knew getting Daniel in trouble would only make things worse, but I also knew that I had to do something. Standing up to Daniel made me feel shaky and sick, and I super definitely didn't want to have to feel that way forever. I imagined H2O flying off into the distance and entering a big fluffy white cloud in the blue sky. I decided that's where he lives. Everyone's seen it. It's the big cloud that's shaped like a dragon. It probably feels like being wrapped in cotton balls, like the ones my mom uses on her face. If the cloud wasn't there and the sky was clear blue, it would be because H2O had gone to visit his friends or something. And when the cloud was darker and spilled rain onto the earth, that would be when H2O was taking a shower. You didn't think dragons needed to wash? Well, maybe your dragon doesn't see as much action as my H2O. All right, that's the end of chapter 14. And I think that's where I'm going to pause today. 3 chapters is quite enough. I just think it's so great how Omar has this like wild imagination, and then he brings that, the author brings that into the story. I think that's such a creative thing to do. Oftentimes when we write realistic fiction, we're so focused on real events that happen, we forget that imagination is a part of real events, right? Like, even though you're imagining things that maybe couldn't happen in real life, like he's imagining his dragon called H2O, it doesn't make it a fantasy book, I think. It makes it like just his real imagination creating crazy things. Anyway, that's just what I'm thinking now. So yeah, I think that's all for today. And it was great reading with you. And I'll see you next week for chapter 15.